My name is Sally Ann Wilson, and I'd like, first of all, to thank all of you for coming when there's such a fantastic range of things that you could be attending at DocFest. In 2001, I stood on a platform at DocFest and launched the project that became WorldView. And you can't imagine how exciting it is to be here 11 years on in the media industry, to have a project that's lasted for 11 years and grown over that 11 years. To be here today and host a whole load of new initiatives that WorldView is launching and involved in. In those 11 years, we've funded in excess of 350 broadcast projects that have all had screenings in the UK, but have also had screenings globally. Most of those have been doc features. And many, many of them have been with some of the world's leading directors. They weren't always the world's leading directors when they started. Very often they were people who came to us right at the beginning of their careers for a little bit of development funding, a little bit of lift. Our funding is unique. You don't have to pay it back. We have a very simple non-BBC contract that is just 2 pages long. We do keep after you to make sure you do the deliverables, but it gives you the chance to go and explore the world and tell the stories of the world, and to bring that worldview back to our doors and our screens. And that doesn't matter where you live or where you're from. Increasingly, we fund filmmakers from around the world. The new initiative is that we've now got such an alumni that we really are inviting and asking all of them, and they're all very willing to share the knowledge, because we feel as people come into the industry, what we've pulled together as a knowledge bank, and the directors that we work with and the producers we work with over those 11 years has become a fantastic repository of knowledge and experience for filming around the world. Some of our top directors, I work now globally for an organisation called the Commonwealth Broadcasting Association, which I lead, which is the world's largest association of public service broadcasters. So the BBC here in the UK, Australia, ABC, Canada, CBC, but also many, many smaller broadcasters globally. And it doesn't matter where I go, many of the films that WorldView has taken that risk on and funded are known. I'm not entirely sure always where the copyright has been bought, but, I'll be working in Nigeria, I'll be working in New Zealand, and people will go, English Surgeon, Afghan Star, oh, that's an amazing film. And that really makes me and the team, and many of the team have worked with us from the very early days, feel that we really are doing something to get that worldview out. Some of those leading directors are here with us today, and they're part of this new Share the Knowledge initiative. They are the chair for this afternoon, Brian Woods, who founded a company called True Vision that's made many UK but many international films looking at social issues worldwide. Brian and his team have gained many, many awards. A BAFTA for Zimbabwe's Forgotten Children, which we had some involvement with, and many critically acclaimed films such as World Without Water and Jezza Newman, who's actually in the audience, War Child. Phil Cox at the far end on the panel is been making films for the last 10 years. He came with an early film called We Are the Natives, and to WorldView, but has since gone on. He's won Rory Peck Awards for his work in the Sudan and the civil war there, and been nominated for 7 other international documentary awards. His most recent film is Bengali Detective, and Phil's actually working with us on a consultancy basis at the moment to help us steer WorldView into the future. Next we have Rachel Wexler. Rachel is a producer, not a director, but Rachel set up Bungalow Town Productions with her partner Jez Lewis back in 2004, and has since made, again, a number of award-winning films, including English Surgeon, and produced films which have won awards such as the Emmy for English Surgeon and Grierson for Out of the Ashes, all funded by WorldView, or development funded by WorldView. We then have Jerry Rothwell. I hope some of you, hope all of you, have been to see Town of Runners. That's the most recent film that Jerry has done, funded again by WorldView, but has also been, his background was Donor Unknown as a director, but also established First Light, the UK Film Council's initiative for young filmmakers. Guy Davidi. Guy was born in Jaffa, but is a documentary filmmaker and cinema teacher. He's been directing, editing and shooting films since the age of 16. And his most recent film, supported by WorldView, is here at the festival again, Five Broken Cameras, a shattering film, if any of you have had a chance to go and see it, which he co-directed with Ahmad Bennat. So it's an amazing team. We also have Sean McAllister, and I was going to be rude about Sean, but he's late anyway. Sean is somebody who has made, really left school at 16 and filmed his way into the National Film School. And since he graduated in '96, he's made films for the BBC, Channel 4, in the UK, Israel, Iran, Japan, and most recently Syria, where he was kept rather longer than he intended for a while, I recall. His other film recently, which was screened by Storytellers, is The Reluctant Revolutionary. So between them, they have... He only came in late to get the applause. So even today, just with the WorldView alumni that are here, we've got a fantastic repository of knowledge, and we hope this is going to be a very interactive session and that you'll be able to find out more about them. Because as WorldView goes forward, we're developing a mentoring scheme where newer filmmakers will be partnered with somebody who has more experience, by agreement, of course, to actually mentor you through the difficult bits and be there to support you and advise you. We know that we've started this already, and we know it's working very well. We have new funds for narrative films and cross-platform initiatives, and new partnerships with IDFA and Sundance. So for us at the moment, the future's looking very bright. Thank you again, and I'm going to hand over to Brian Woods and say, let's carry WorldView on for another 11 years. Thank you.
You're going to play the clip.
In fact, I think what we're going to do first is just see the clip of some of the highlights of WorldView in recent years. So if you can roll the first clip, and then Brian would pick up from there.
As you know, there is a lot of problems in the world today, you know. Everywhere there is a complex fighting, you know. The solution of all the problem is cricket.
China and Shawala Lafam. China, Shawala Lafam. I want to offer more job for your people.
Tani order see the honey. You have all the wabu. You have to see the kidney.
Okay, Thailand over there. Thailand for Thailand. Okay, and UK. Okay, UK over there.
Hello, I'd like to welcome you all to Sheffield.
The bloodbath, but it will be blood swimming pool.
Meaning what? What's the difference?
The bloodbath will be a few hundreds. The blood swimming pool will be thousands.
Se a gente não tiver um sinal que nossos filhos seguir aquela vida reta, poderia se tornar traficante, alguma coisa assim.
الأديب هذا دائما بتحين الفرص عشان يعمل مشهد.
The beastly tumour which has been ruining his life for so many years, I am now starting to remove it.
What are we if we don't try to help others? We're nothing. Nothing at all.
Okay, so as Sally-Ann said, there's WorldView starting a sort of mentoring scheme in due course, and this in a way is the beginning of that, because the idea is that these incredibly wise and experienced filmmakers will be imparting their little nuggets of wisdom to all of you, and hopefully some of you will be sharing some of your nuggets back as well, so I'm going to pick on people if you're falling asleep. What we're going to do, we've sort of very loosely structured it in terms of a few sort of top tips. However, what I really want to do is involve all of you. So here we have 5 fabulous brains to be picked. Now you can pick them in 2 ways. You can either pick them by sticking your hand up and asking a question that way, or if you're feeling too shy to expose yourself to such public scrutiny, then do feel free to tweet. The hashtag is #WVStory, and in theory, if the technology works, then it'll appear on my iPad here, and we'll be able to be really kind of 2012-ish about it and ask questions via tweets. So please tweet a few questions just for the hell of it, really. You know, like, what's your favourite way of taking a Starbucks, that kind of thing. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask these guys to come up with a few tips in a few different areas. I've already warned them that hopefully they'll volunteer lots of information. If they fail to, I'll start picking on them. We're going to start with, this is all about making films abroad. And for many people in this audience, I think going to some foreign land is a big an adventure in itself, let alone then having to make a film. So the first area of tips we want are top tips on survival. So it can be ever so simple or ever so complex and serious. Phil, do you want to start us off with a top tip on how to survive a foreign shoot?
Well, for some strange reason, all my films seem to be outside of the UK. So I seem to be glad to run away as soon as possible from England. I don't know why. I think you get ready to sort of a discipline of a lot of things. One is very aware of your own profile and who you are in accordance of where you're filming. I always had a couple of tips. I worked in conflict a lot of time, which is never film a losing side, losing army. Keep lots of cigarettes in your pockets. But I think one thing that was important for me is when you arrive in a place, it's a bit like the white coat doctor syndrome. I made many mistakes. I used to just presume because locals would know, or that I would trust the person who sat on the camel because they were in the desert and they would know. And it's when you compart your ability to control your own destiny or your risk or your safety often to someone else who doesn't really care so much about you. For an example, I was filming the Western Sahara, and I wanted to go and film the berm, which is this big sand wall across the middle of the Western Sahara, and it's one of the biggest mined areas in the world. So I saw a local chap who looked like a Bedouin. I thought, there you go, there's someone who's definitely going to know how to look after me. And he took me up to the berm, and I'm filming the beautiful light on the berm, and it's great. And I say to him, where did the mine start? And he said, oh, about 100 yards back. And I said, so where are we? And he goes, well, we're in the minefield. And it was a very quick lesson for me about comparting my own decision-making and my own safety and my own ability to understand or make decisions in this foreign place simply to someone who was there. It doesn't mean that they're going to be right and I'm wrong, but I'm always now very wary of when we go to somewhere else that we're unsure of, that we don't have a good understanding. We're there with the camera. Who is the person who is going to be that mediator for us? So I learned the hard way I managed to walk out the minefield, but I didn't make that mistake again.
Okay, so I'm going to summarise those. A few tips there. We've got
cigarettes.
Pick the right side to be on, very important. Carry fags.
Carry cigarettes.
And don't go into minefields.
No.
Yep, fair enough, fair summary. And obviously the more serious point is find the right people to trust. We're going to come on to that actually later in terms of finding and working with fixers and translators, because that's obviously a really critical thing. Sean, you've gone to a few fairly dangerous places.
Oh, God.
How do you survive?
How to survive? I always take an extra bottle of whiskey, especially in the Muslim world. And that tends to always come in handy. Yeah, I don't really use fixers. I try to find people that I film who fix for me and look after me. So even though it sometimes seems that I'm putting myself in danger in the films, I always feel relatively safe because the people that I can really, really trust are the people that I film. So they become my guardian, really, and look after me.
And what about security?
Well, the way to do that with the BBC is to sort of shoot the majority of it in development. And by the time they see the dangerous stuff, you don't need to go back, and then they can commission it.
So what do you reckon to hostile environment courses then?
Well, the most traumatic thing, I mean, I was arrested actually last year in Syria for a week, but the most, and held for a week in a Syrian prison, but the most scary thing I've done in the last few years is the hostile environment course. I don't recommend it. It's quite traumatic, and I'm still shaking from it. They kidnap you, put a thing over your head and start firing. You know, it's not how it really happens. Not in my experience, anyhow. But I mean, I take the risks, and I kind of rely on the people around me to guide me through these danger zones, really. And so far, apart from working for Channel 4 News, so far so good.
Jerry, what about you?
Well, I mean, my films are so safe and tame by comparison in terms of conflict zones. I mean, they don't have the same kinds of risks. I think the issue of who your allies are is critical. And I was filming in Ethiopia for the last 3 years, and that's politically an enormously complex place. You know, and you've got kind of people positioned in a particular town very differently in relation to each other. So it's trying to get there and understand, you know, who are your allies, but also why? What's their agenda? Why are they your allies? Why are they helping you? What's in it for them? And I think that takes some time to come to. But for me, that's the analytical bit that needs to go on.
So sussing out people's agendas.
Yeah,
I think that's.
I mean, that's
really
really hard to do when you're fresh in a place. But
yeah, because I think that's one of the things. You know, everyone who takes part in a film has reasons for doing it, and they're not necessarily the reasons that you think they are initially, and trying to work that out is really helpful. So on that point, all three of you in a way have talked about trusting people and working out who you can trust and so on. Any stories of where that hasn't worked out, where you've actually thought you can trust someone and then obviously you got kidnapped?
No, I didn't get kidnapped, but a friend of mine did, and that was through his fixer that he thought he could trust. Of course, those are the biggest pitfalls, you know. And that was Sean Langan, who was held for three months by the Taliban in Afghanistan. So those are always the inherent dangers. I'm just trying to think, when I was in Iraq, I don't know, in Iraq it was working, you had the choice of working as a hard, there was terminology of it being a soft target or a hard target, and if you had the luxury of being the BBC News, you had like these SAS guys that would protect you, and they were, you know, paid lots of money, and you drive around in these steel bulletproof vehicles. If you're in documentaries, you're what's known as a soft target. And you're staying not in a big, high-profile, highly protected hotel with blast walls for suicide attacks. you're staying just in a little small hotel, and you're going out in an ordinary car, and you're kind of covering yourself and looking as much like a local, which I actually prefer, and I think it's a lot safer to operate like that, because if you're going in this kind of convoy in which BBC and CNN go, they're really obvious, and they have one car in front and one behind, and there was a policy when I was there where they were not armed, so when they came into the situation where they were under attack, well, CNN were armed. The Americans would always arm and fight back, and the BBC, for some reason, we had no guns. We were saying, I don't know. Anyway,
British.
So we're British.
Show them your passport.
We're your fathers. Abunadji, we were called. Anyway, so that was, yeah, so I was always a soft target, and I always sort of try to do that. I think it's second nature whenever I go to any of these places now, is to always blend in and never make a big scene and just be in the street as one of them, and never be too sort of loud and brash. I remember in Damascus always seeing the odd outsider arriving, a journalist or someone that was suddenly branding this terminology. They kind of stand out like a sore thumb. You know, it's a matter of just going to these places and blending in.
Guy, what about you? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah. I've filmed many dangerous, and I've been into many dangerous moments, and I think even when I just started filming in Palestine, I was caught in many situations in which not just the army was shooting at us, but also Palestinians were raging and throwing stones, and you cannot choose by your ideology where you want to be, because it's a big mess. But actually what I found out as a filmmaker, that the most dangerous situation, and the more the situation is dangerous, then the more it's going to be covered. There are more cameramen filming that, and everybody's targeting their cameras to the violence. And actually my answer to taking this surviving is actually not to put myself in that risk, because there are so many other people who are doing that. And actually what's funny is that no one gets the impact of the things, and no one films to the other direction. And that's where I'm trying to put myself in this situation, because I've been to one scene, a very strong scene of an Israeli activist running in the street, and there are stones thrown at her, and she's trying to block the soldiers from shooting. And I was filming that, and everybody else was filming that, and then I realized, okay, everybody's filming that, and then I started to film the other direction. And I got all the kids that are covering their hands on their eyes and all this kind of reaction, and I found out that that's actually much more interesting. And the scene that was edited, I was a cameraman then, that scene that was edited, the strongest moment was the kids that were covering their faces. So sometimes it's not about just filming the violence or just going into a violent zone, but it's also to say, okay, that's not, I'm doing a film. My function is not necessarily just having the event. It's also trying to find the impacts of it. And for me, it's comfortable because I risk less my life. I'm not built, I've worked with Imad. He's a tough guy, and he can suffocate gas over a week, one week after 1 week, and I'm asthmatic, so I cannot breathe all this gas 1 week after another. But when I edited his film, his footage, I realized that I have just tons of violence and nothing else. And I went back to my footage that was a bit covering, the settlement, the atmosphere of the village, and then I asked him to film more of that also, because everybody's focusing on the violence and everybody forgets about, the impacts of the things.
So that's a really, really good tip, that avoid danger. Excellent, excellent. Rachel, what about your thoughts on this?
Well, I suppose because I'm a producer, so I'm very happily sitting at home at my nice small cosy desk and not having to, I'm full of admiration for people who go out there. But the films that WorldView funded with Bungalow Town, they're more working with filmmakers who are already embedded in that place. Out of the Ashes, 3 really great journalists and filmmakers that were living in Afghanistan, and then they found the Afghan cricket team and started following them, and then I came on board some while after they started shooting, and with Speed Sisters, which is a project that we're doing, which we've got a clip of later. It's being made, it's about Palestinian women racing drivers, and it's being made by a Canadian Lebanese woman filmmaker who lives in Ramallah, but she's been living there several years. So in a way, for me, as a producer, I see the real benefits of working with people who are in the field already. But I have done the opposite thing of working and looking after filmmakers who are going out into the field. So, for instance, as a line producer years ago, I was organising Phil Grabsky's trips to Bamiyan to film in the caves there with the boy who, God, I can't remember, plays in the Buddhas of Bamiyan. So, and that whole thing, and if you do it kind of with the broadcasters knowing, like Sean said, it's a real minefield. You know, it's really difficult. It's all that judgment as a producer it's quite terrifying, someone going out into a situation where you're not quite sure what's going to happen. I mean, I'm a bit of a risk-averse person generally, so I do tend to do quite a lot of work. We do quite a lot of work of supporting and knowing what they're doing and where they're going to be, and what, you know. And you can't be too belt and braces because you can't make a film like that. But, you know, I do think if you're going somewhere, it is good to phone in, you know, phone home, because people won't, you know, just have strategy, have things available to you so that if you are away, you know, you've got a time every day or whatever, if it's practical, to just send that text or whatever. Have some backup, know who you're going to ring in a crisis, know who. You know, it's those kinds of things, really. I think there are, without being too nannying, and I'm sure Sean would find it really suffocating working with me because I'd nanny him to death. But,
well, the only time I was actually arrested was when I followed these procedures with Channel 4 News.
Is that what happened, Sean? So
well, they kind of feel guilty about that because they said for 3 years prior to that, I'd been filming happily, undercover, on my own.
So were you asked to phone home every day?
Twice a day.
Really?
Morning and night.
You see, we had that.
And it's a very
Channel
dangerous
4.
thing because you don't know whether they're listening into your calls. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just, you know,
but
and
then
these
has
kind
to
of
be
production meetings
with
over the telephone. What did you film today? I mean, give me a fucking break.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but they were asking for them, because they wanted to, you know,
See,
in retrospect now they look at this and they say, you know, it was kind of stupid of us. Now, you know.
I think it's also working very much with the expertise of the filmmaker. So the filmmaker knows, you know, you do have to work in conjunction. So, but I think there are just some basic safety things that maybe you have, and you know, as a producer, I just need to know that they can phone back and, you know, sort these things out. But yeah, I think it's ever changing as well. How we adapt is a big question, isn't it? Because these structures that the BBC, these systems that everybody has, they have to be constantly changing and re-evaluated. So I do think you can challenge your broadcaster.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, in fairness, certainly the ones I know at the BBC and Channel 4, they are constantly trying to make them better. But also, they don't want dead journalists.
No, they don't.
That's bad.
They don't.
It's a bit of a pain. So much paperwork.
There is something I can say about that. I was asked a few times, why aren't we using uniforms that can identify us as journalists? And actually, that's it kind of protects us, but it has a big effect on our accessibility. Because once I'm wearing this uniform as journalist, and I'm isolating myself with what's happening, then I'm isolating myself with what's happening, and I'm going to be treated like that. And part of the importance and the strength of the film is to be completely from within. So I'm limiting my possibilities once I'm identified as a journalist. So I never wear this kind of clothes. I'm always in the middle. Of course, I'm Israeli, so it has a meaning for the local villagers to be within them and to serve some kind of a protector also. But that's something that gave me the accessibility to tell the story in a different way and to be able to reach to people because they weren't considering me as a journalist from outside. Then I think it's very important. So sometimes, you know, taking all the measures to protect yourself can hurt the filmmaking itself. So.
But equally, good good friend of mine, James Miller, was wearing a flak jacket, TV on it, and a helmet, and all of that stuff, and got shot in the throat and killed in Gaza. So it doesn't always help, even if you do take all those things. I just want to bring a bit of balance to Sean's comments about HE courses, and I just want to, I know Jezza Newman, you've filmed in some fairly risky places, and what do you think about HE courses and all the protocols, the 30, 40, 50, 60, sometimes more page protocols that have to be filled in beforehand?
I think that the importance is, which was basically touched on through Sean's comment, was that if you can get the high-risk course tailored to where you're going, that's really helpful. When I went to Zimbabwe, we managed to get the BBC to agree to let us do it in South Africa. So we were doing it with the SAS-type blokes who actually operated in that region. So then at least we were getting, we were then getting the first-hand information, current intel off the ground of what the roadblock situation was in Zimbabwe. So that was useful for me, and the same when I went to Gaza, I was able to tailor it to much more to working in a war zone, which I hadn't done before, and to medical stuff. If you get shot, how do you treat that wound, which is very difficult to drowning in a swimming pool or something, So I think if you can get it tailored, that's fantastic, and we always try to push for that. It's not always possible. As far as the security protocol is concerned, certainly writing it before you go, I think, is essential for any new filmmaker. If I was going to send or go to a foreign country for the very first time, seek out a security protocol that a seasoned filmmaker's done before and try and fill one out yourself. I thought this was ridiculous when I went to China. Here I was writing about hypothetical situations in a country I'd never been to, about a hypothetical restaurant where hypothetically I was going to get caught and I hypothetically knew what I was going to do. I didn't have a clue, but when we wrote through the process, when it actually happened and the security services came, we instantly had a plan of what we might do, and that had helped us by doing that process. So I'd say that they're great for that learning ground, that travelling ground. And then the other top tip I'd do is always take a plastic cafetiere and some real coffee, especially if you took a bottle of whiskey.
Okay, so take real coffee and Marmite. Any other essentials? Real coffee, Marmite. We've had fags, whiskey, real coffee, Marmite.
Imodium.
Imodium. Okay. So real coffee, Marmite, Imodium. Can we get a mic over?
I took cuppa soup to Yemen.
Cuppa soup. These are all really top tips here. We're getting good stuff now. Real coffee, Marmite, cuppa soup, Imodium, and a cafetiere.
I agree on the Marmite. I'm not sure on the Imodium. Let it out. Don't keep it in. It will do more damage if you keep it in. The one thing I will say as well, that we work with WorldView with the team, with Marion, Linda and Amy who are here. You're often working with us with development funding you, so you're often not yet with the broadcaster. And one thing we offer is 24/7 support when you want it. With Sean, we have no idea where he's going, what he's doing. That's his choice. But if you do need it, if you just need to phone and rant and rave or check something out with us, we've had filmmakers arrested. We've never lost anyone. We've never had anyone hurt, other than by an antelope coming through a windscreen. But, we're always there. There's always somebody who you can just test things through in a way. Or we've had occasions where people have phoned on a landline and we've said, you need to get to this point, phone us on a mobile. But we will always be there for you. So we sort of provide that mid-level knowledge base. We often work with you before you go with other filmmakers, and that's the whole idea, I think, of the mentoring scheme going forward, who have already worked in that particular country. We arrange to tailor hostile environments for you. So that's another thing that we offer, is the support as well as the funding support.
And that, I think, I've just ringed that hugely. I mean, I think that's really, really important, first aid training. Everyone I know who's done an HE course might have, like Sean said, everyone hates the bit where you get kidnapped and it just feels irrelevant and all that kind of thing. But equally, everyone I know who's done an HE course has said, first aid's great. Because, if you're going somewhere, they don't have NHSs outside the UK. They don't necessarily have a hospital that functions or any drugs or anything like that. Just knowing what to do when there's a car accident is really, really useful. Someone down here.
Journalist, and he said that when he had issues with internet, and being worried that people are recording your emails or phone calls that you're making. What he had set up before he left London was an email account and basically given the password to his editor. And instead of sending any information, he would just save it as a draft. So if he had any copy that he wanted his editor to look at, no email was being exchanged anywhere, so it wouldn't be possible to track. It was literally, he was just logging on, doing something, saving it as a draft, and someone in London could then open it, and if there was any codes or messages he had to say, like, help, or, you know, he could do it that way. I don't know if that's helpful for anyone.
Yeah, and the other thing is Hushmail, which some of you may know about, but that's an encrypted service whereby it travels across the internet completely encrypted, and you go from Hushmail account to Hushmail account. And apparently, the CIA have tried to close it down several times because they're pissed off because people use it and they can't read them. So it's good enough to fool the CIA. Okay, I think if there's no more questions on that one, no? Yes, one more. Good.
Maybe just also about emergencies in different countries. I think it's very important to learn about the local ways of treating emergencies. And because in some countries you wouldn't call 999, you wouldn't call an ambulance, you know, and it's very important to know how to get to a hospital.
Great, good. Okay, I think it's about time we had a clip. Jerry, do you want to just tell us about the clip we're going to see from Town of Runners?
Okay. Yeah, we were asked to come up with a controversial clip. And this, on the surface, is not at all controversial, but I think it sort of just raises some of the issues about intervention, I suppose, the kind of intervention. It's very sort of... the context of the scene is I was working in a small village in Ethiopia with a couple of girls, teenage girls, who wanted to be runners. In order to become a runner in Ethiopia, you really need to sort of graduate to the clubs in Addis Ababa. And they'd got selected for a club that was a couple hundred miles away from their home. That meant really that they were leaving home. They were 13 at the time. And this is the moment one of them arrives there. So there's been a bit of a build-up. She's, you know, excited about it. And I think this is her arrival there.
እንግዲህ ሳሎን አለው፣ ሽንት ቤት አለው፣ ሻወር ቤት አለው፣ 2 መኝታ ክፍል ያለው። ስለዚህ ለወደፊቱ ተሰርቶ ሲያልቅ የምትኖሩበትና ብዙ ጊዜ የምትቆዩበት ቤታችሁ ይሆናል ማለት ነው። ፊኒሺንጉ ብቻ ነው የቀረው፣ ሌላ ተሰርቷል። ፊኒሺንጉ በቅርብ ጊዜ እንትን ይላል፣ ያልቃል። መኝታ ቤት ነው። ደግሞ ሊያልቅ ነው። ኦልሬዲ የቀረው ፊኒሺንጉ ብቻ ነው ማለት ነው። ማብራት ብቻ ነው። ቀለም ምናምን ከዛ በኋላ ፍሬሽ ይደረግና ያልቃል። እና በቅርብ ጊዜ ውስጥ ቤታችሁ ይሆናል ማለት ነው።
አልጋ ራሱ አልተያዘልም።
ምንድን ነው እሱ?
እሱም አላለቀም።
ምን አውቃለሁ።
ያስፈራል። ቤቱ ብዙ ለምን ያስፈራል። አንሶላ ምናምን ይሄንን ብቻ ነው ፍራሹን ብቻ እንሰጣቸዋለን። በራሳችሁ እንትን አንሶላ ምናምን ይዛችሁ ነው ተብሏል። ድሮ ነው ተናግሯል እና በራሳችሁ ሁሉንም እስከምትሄዱ የሚቸግራችሁ ነገር አንዳንድ ጠይቁ። ይሄን አልጠበኩም።
So Jerry, what do you do?
Well, I mean, I suppose in that situation, the question from a very simple question from a filmmaking point of view is, maybe I should say a little bit more context. They never actually got into they didn't get into the buildings until those buildings were never finished, and they never actually moved there for the next 6 months. So that for the next 6 months, they were kind of in that small hut. I suppose, and there was I think 30 of them. I suppose the sort of question is, in your back pocket, you've got enough money to, at least solve that problem for probably a month. You know, you could sort them food, lodgings, blankets, and you know, enormous temptation to solve that problem. And the question is, should you? And what's the point of solving it? I suppose. In the short term, and it's.
Before you say what you did,
yeah. Okay.
Can I just have a show of hands? Who would have at least bought them blankets? Okay, and who would not buy them blankets? Okay, so we've got a majority saying at least buy them blankets, and actually we've got a majority not expressing an opinion at all. But of those who expressed an opinion, then we've got a majority in favour of buying blankets.
I mean, the other question is who would have then taken that up with the authorities?
Go on, put your hands up properly. Hands up if you're going to take that up with the authorities. You're going to talk to someone about this.
Okay.
Whoa, not very many. Okay, and hands up if you wouldn't take it up with the authorities. And hands up if you've got no idea what you'd do. Jerry.
Yeah, you don't know enough about the authorities issue.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. What did we do? We filmed in order to, I guess, to understand what would have happened had we not been there, and to be able to show that, because I think there's in a way that's what you're bearing witness to. We then did buy them blankets, but we didn't show that on the film, and we didn't take it up with the town authorities because that would have got us kicked out of the town. So yeah, that's
And so you've got conflicting things here, haven't you? You've got duty of care to contributors, but you've also got a duty of sort of trust, if you like, to your viewers about being honest with them, and you've chosen not to tell them that you've bought them blankets.
Because I don't think it's in the context of the film at that moment. It's not particularly relevant. Yeah, I mean, if it was materially relevant to understanding that situation, I would have done that. But yeah.
So, Jerry, there's a thing on the WorldView website where the interviews with most of you, I think, and in yours, one of the things you say is that you started filming in your 30s, and when you said if I was 21 and someone just described going in and doing this kind of thing, I'd have said there should be a law against it. So in a way, with the exception of Guy, we've got four white Western European filmmakers who are going into the developing world and exploiting the misery of those in the developing world and then coming back and making profits in.
Yeah, I think, I used to...
I wish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I used to be work with film and community work. That was sort of my background. And I suppose that the point of those films was about the way, and the point of that work was about the way in which that process and people making films themselves, which I think is, pretty much where Guy's coming from in his film, creates a different kind of power from someone coming in and making a film about people. I think as I've got older, I think that role of a sort of, the kind of witness to situations, the ability to sort of stand outside it and to broaden it from the specifics of the situation you're in to something much wider is really valuable. But I think it's ethically fraught.
Joey, just coming back onto that interview you did, you mentioned something at the beginning of your filming in Town of Runners where the people sort of wanted to know what they were going to get back out of the film. So you had a meeting and the athletics club.
People have said to me Ethiopia is a very difficult place to film. There is control of the media. They control all the equipment that comes in and out of the country. You need a permit for where you film every day. So you're doing stuff under the wire, but they also have a very sophisticated network of informers. So where you film, if you film in the market, as we did once, you kind of get a knock on the door in the evening and there's a security, Ministry of Communications guy who wants to look at all your footage. And the tip for that is just bore them with the most boring stuff. The great thing about digital things is you can go straight to the most boring bit. But the first time we went there, it was very easy. And I think often the first time you go to a place, it's very easy. You've got some perhaps key allies who at that moment are going to be your allies. They haven't kind of maybe worked out, what their agenda is. Maybe that's going to come clear later. And we sort of left and had shot a lot of material, and it was all very simple. Second time we went back, it became much more complex because we walked into the middle of a big sort of dispute within the town about funding and about athletes being able to go to competitions. And we were sort of kind of implicated in that dispute, implicated as a possible solution to that problem, which got us into sort of 2-day meetings with the town. In the end, we came to an agreement about our entire shooting, and it was a very good process where we sort of agreed that every time we went, we would contribute into the athletics budget. But then that kicked off another argument because that athletics budget was used for some athletes and not others. So wherever we filmed, some athletes would refuse to work with us. So there's a lot. That second visit, there was a lot of working out of local politics. And by the end of that second visit, I think we probably had worked it out. So we went back 8 times altogether, and each time, I think by that, you know, we started to have a very different, much more collaborative relationship with people.
Phil, what about you? Can you think of an example, a situation where you've thought, should I intervene, should I not intervene? As Jerry says, I've got £5 in my pocket.
I mean, constantly. I mean, that's a constant dilemma. But you're, you know, as a filmmaker and observer, ethically, the line, that's the questions that are happening all the time as a filmmaker, I think, in many situations that I'm doing. But you're also thinking of the power of the film that you're going to make and showing the situation. And you're also asking, how far does this have to go before I step in? And if I do step in, will it change my film? Is the film beyond their responsibility of these people? You know, so these are constant questions. I mean, if I could show my clip, I could do that.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
This is a film which comes into what Brian's asking me, called The Bengali Detective. So it's a film about a private detective in Calcutta, India, and he has a sort of motley band of assistants. And he's not a really great detective, but they have a sort of dance troupe. And for me, as a filmmaker, it was a way as a window into Indian society through the people who come to see him. So this is a clip where it's a homicide case, and he goes to meet the supposed victim for the first time as part of this case. So we could show it, and then I'll explain why this became one of the biggest controversy for me in my sort of filmmaking career, really.
केस के बारे में बताया था 3 मर्डर जो शामिल करने हैं क्या केस सॉल्व करना चाह रहे हैं इसको
हाँ जरूर हमारा तो कोई नहीं है
आपका एक ही लड़का था
हमारा क्यों लड़का था
आपको क्या लगता है किस तरह मर्डर हुआ है किस तरह के ऐसे
কিছু তো বুঝতে পারছি না কোনোদিন এরকম বাইরে থেকে মারামারি করে জামা কাপড় ছিঁড়ে ঘরে এসেছে সেরকম জীবনে কোনোদিন ঘরে ঢোকেনি
ये जो घटना घटा है आपको ऐसा नहीं लगता कि अचानक ऐसा घटना घट गया कभी कोई दुश्मनी नहीं था
ना ना ना
कोई नहीं मिस नहीं
भाई उन्हीं फोने কিছু কথা বলতো আপনি শুনেছেন কিছু
না 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 11 তারিখে বেরিয়েছে আর 11 তারিখ 5টার সময় বেরিয়েছে আর বাড়ি আসেনি এই লাইন में ऐसे सुला के रखा था हमारा लड़का को जी कुछ नहीं ऐसे पाम नहीं है पाम नहीं मिला चप्पल से मार में मुंह में कोई पहचान जाता है
कुछ नहीं
दांत इधर उठाया था लाइन में ऐसे पीछे का खोल ही नहीं था
बहुत अच्छा था हैंडसम
बहुत हमसे ऐसे लंबा ऐसे आपको फाड़ के रख देगा हमारा लड़का
नहीं हैंडसम हम देख लिए क्या है
So that's the scene as I'm starting to film, and there's a very distressed mother, there's my detective, and it's all starting off this story of one of the biggest triple murders in Calcutta. So, you know, I'm aware it's real, it's happening. What I start to quickly find out is actually we think the mother is complicit in the murder. And I realise she knows that I know, and I'm pretty damn certain she arranged for the murder of her son, but the detective's not good enough to really know that, let alone get the evidence on her. So what do I do? So am I portraying her as this, you know, the mother, kind mother? Do I start my own investigation and try and make the detective find evidence? do I start, working outside of following him, because it's his story. It's not it's not an investigative film by Phil Cox as a journalist. And each time I meet her, I can the crocodile tears, and there's so much more happening, and I'm in an absolute conundrum of what do I do. So, what do I do?
So, what does he do? Anybody got any ideas? What would? Yes, at the back there.
Bring that narrative into the film.
Okay, so incorporate the idea of the dilemma of the filmmaker. Yeah, that's a good one. Jezza?
Phone his executive and producer and ask them what their opinion is.
Yeah, there isn't one.
Refer up. Yeah,
it's my mum.
Are you talking about her behaviour? Was it evidence of her having been complicit in it, or?
Yeah, as the film started to unravel, other people within her family came forward with testimony about the mother and the son fighting, death threats, another lover involved. So all these things, but the detective wasn't following these up. I'm not a great detective. I've got sort of basic Sherlock Holmes novel skills, and there was stuff, there's a big machete by her bed, she didn't have an alibi, what was on her mobile phone numbers, all these things. So do I start telling Rajesh, our hero, look, can you just and it drove my team crazy, Lisa, and we'd go into the house and we want to be looking for clues and push the detective to do basic detective skills. But he wasn't doing that, so I didn't want to make a film where I entered the film. This really wasn't my film. And so how we tried to solve it was incorporate these accusations by the other family into the narrative. But then I could have a film where I accuse a lady in my film of murdering her son without any proper evidence in a country where mob rule can suddenly go and kill her or burn down her house. So how do I portray this lady in the film? I've got to be very careful that it's going to be shown back in the country, and I feel the filmmakers portrayed her as a murderer. And the police and the law courts have to do that. So it was a very subtle balance in the film where there were suggestions by the other family, and then I had to say, they also weren't substantiated. So I let the audience try and have a feeling that she might be guilty, but also there wasn't enough evidence to follow it on. It was a really, really hard balance when, I felt she knew I knew, and I knew she knew, and I'm still a bit haunted by this lady.
Question down here.
Who, the detective, Rajesh? No. Definitely not. I chose my character here because he wasn't the best detective, but he was a wonderful human being who I could access, who was an everyman. It wasn't his fault. He tried, but he just wasn't that great.
So, Rachel, sitting back in the warmth and comfort of the production office, have you had occasions when someone's phoned you from the field with that dilemma of should I intervene, shouldn't I intervene?
Well, I was going to use, actually the clip isn't the same as the example, but some of you may have seen The English Surgeon, and that one, it wasn't that there was this dramatic phone call, but I don't know if anyone remembers the scene where a very beautiful blonde girl goes in to meet with Henry and Igor, the doctors, and Henry, speaking in English to Igor, talks about the fact that she has an incurable tumour. She's going to go blind and then die. She doesn't understand what they're saying, but we as the audience know what they're saying, and that was a very difficult call, because Henry, there was no way Henry Marsh, the doctor, and Geoffrey, the filmmaker, were going to let that go out without having gone back and talked to her family. And it was just really tragic and difficult. And there were a few people that found that very difficult as audience members to actually be privy to that doctor's conversation, and that she was not going to be told.
It was incredibly powerful.
It was very, very difficult. But I think it was the right decision in the end, because then they personally went and found her, and by then she had gone blind, and she was dying, and she knew then, and it was very advanced, and the disease was taking her very quickly, and she didn't care about the film. It really wasn't. But it was the right thing to do. But I just wondered what people in the audience, if anyone remembers that scene, whether they felt that crossed some kind of line, or whether that was the right thing, because the film was about the doctor's experience. It wasn't from the patient point of view. It was always going to be about the doctor's experience and the dilemmas and the challenges the challenge for Henry in doing the right thing, that he can't cure everybody and he can damage people. And so I just wondered, you know, that was a, but it doesn't reflect. I mean, there's another dilemma with the clip, but you know, I thought that for me was a very powerful one.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that from the audience? Yes, back here.
Didn't he say why he wasn't going to tell her, and it just wasn't a good idea?
He did, actually. He did, and I think that is what most of us, I think, as the audience, felt then, that the right thing had been done. But we did have a few people react, because in the film, yes, you hear Henry saying, "We can't tell her without a family member here. That's not the responsible thing to do. This is not what..." No, so they did discuss the ethics of it in the film, and I think
but
that
also
was right.
it wasn't really. It was a dilemma, and it was kind of left as a dilemma, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
But it was painful, I thought. But we did have a few people watching it that got very angry and said, you know, we can't. That feels awful that we know this thing and this girl's died, and you don't. You know, you can. But I believe that we came down on the right decision, absolutely. But yeah, it's just sharing that with you, really. That was just the story of these things happen, don't they?
Sean, got any thoughts about when you've wondered about intervening, when you've thought, shouldn't I intervene here?
Well, I cast purely to intervene, really. That's to sort of bridge, that's what I really look for, is someone that would, a situation where I can intervene. But I mean, the last film is an example of where you have to kind of think on your feet, I guess, because I'd been commissioned to make a film in Syria that had fallen through, but I found myself in a difficult financial situation, so I couldn't afford to tell the BBC that it had fallen through when it had fallen through, because I needed the money. So two people in Syria had told me about this really interesting character in Yemen. So that's when I went to Yemen. And I knew that the BBC didn't really want the film in Yemen, because I'd asked Nick Fraser about Yemen and he wasn't that hot. But I figured if I found this character, he'd love him. So I couldn't ask him, I just had to go and show him. That's the best way to do it. So I went, and his situation was interesting because he was running this hotel, and it was in Sana'a. Of course, his circumstances were completely different. By the time I got there, the hotel had gone under. He had no longer had the hotel, but he was still this kind of dynamic character, and revolution was starting to sweep the country. So it was a more interesting scenario. But then my next dilemma was he wasn't with the revolution. So he wasn't, and the revolution camp had started in the center of the town, and he was just staying at home chewing. They chew cat. They don't really drink. They just chew. And that in itself was like, I could have just left him, I suppose, if I was doing the observational film. He wouldn't interfere. But again, my style is to jump in and do things and move things, but also leave that in the narrative of the film so the audience is with all of that. And I took him to the camp, and at first he hated the camp. And I was like facing this dilemma of how am I going to make I've got this great character and I've got this revolution, but they're not, you know, he just wants to stay at home and chew. You know, so it was quite interesting. And at first it was like, shit, you know, I want a revolutionary. And you don't know really where the film is at that stage, but the arc of the film, as it turns out, because I take him again and again, and then eventually he embraces the revolution, to have that arc and to have that material at the beginning where he's resolutely against the revolution and saying why he's against the revolution is a much stronger narrative. You know, so in a way, and there's lots of ethical questions along the whole thing, really, because we then go into a very dangerous circumstances, and I'm at that point taking him into. So in one way, I'm doing it because I'm doing it because I'm making a film, but I'm also doing it because I actually think that staying at home and chewing and just getting depressed because you've lost your hotel and you're down on your luck is no good either. And there's a catalyst for change that we can witness, and I don't know really where it's going to go, but I also don't know if we're both going to get killed. But by the time he's embraced the revolution, it gets really dangerous, and that's when I want to back off and just go home and chew. And he's saying, no, we're going the front line.
Revolutionary, which you can see at 8:45 tonight.
You must, because we've got a big cinema to fill.
Yeah.
And it's playing against that really good film. It's probably sold out, so you might as well come.
This is shooting.
الرسالة الثانية هي للمرابطين على الثغور، هي للمرابطين في خطوط المواجهة. أنتم الثوار، أنتم الثوار الحقيقيون، أنتم الأبطال الحقيقيون، أنتم صناع المجد. فاثبتوا فاثبتوا فاثبتوا.
Shooting. Huh? Well, don't let them see the camera, they'll shoot me.
Yeah. But I kind of agree with what you said earlier. You know, I mean, I think, I was in a situation there where there was about a handful of news journalists, and it was their remit to actually get the. I don't know what the remit of news journalists really is, but for some reason they have to stand in face of the bullets on the front line, or they feel they have to. The beauty of the documentary is we can be in a relatively dangerous scenario, but we can get ourselves, we don't need to be on the front line. By that time, I was trying to get him back, but he'd got the revolution spirit and wanted to take me with it.
So, Guy, when Sean then said, the line he gave was, I cast in order to intervene, and I saw you nodding. Do you agree with that?
I cast, yeah. I think the more the question rises, then it means that you're not enough into your subject. For me, because in the territory, not always, but in the main territories where I work in Palestine, is inevitable that I will intervene. Because if I'm not intervening, then I'm already in the other side. So I have to intervene, and I have to be completely engaged. And the more I'm engaged in the subject, then the question is not coming at all. And actually, and the thing is, it's a more kind of a self-torture question, because it's not the reality. The reality is that there isn't so much that really you can do in most of the situation. I mean, some cases you can do things, but in most situations it doesn't matter if you're the fact that I'm Israeli inside of a demonstration in Palestine, I cannot do so much. I can only shout. In one case, I was the only Israeli cameraman in the middle of the night in Bilin, in this village, and the soldiers just swap into the village to do their night arrest and arresting kids. And it was after a few weeks of arrest, and I was the only Israeli there, and I had an important role because, I was filming that, and it wasn't for my film, but I was just called to film outside because I had the camera and because I was an Israeli. And I had to shout, there are Israelis, in order to protect people, because once the soldiers know that there are Israelis around, then they change their reaction. So there was no question about it, and even the scene was not important for the film or anything, but that was no question. I was doing it because, it's part of what you do when you're there. So I think I'm really happy that I managed to be in that place and to take this role that I cannot act otherwise, and there's no question about it, and what's it's going to influence on the film or not, it's not even a question. But of course, in some cases, when you're obliged to be far from, I filmed one scene far from the subject. Like I filmed a year ago, I filmed one scene of immigrants coming from South Sudan into Israel. And they are kidnapped in Sinai. They're kidnapped by Bedouin gangs that kidnapped them for money. And I was filming a phone call, a regular phone call of these refugees from Sudan, where they were reporting to one of the characters that they're going to be executed the day after if they're not going to be paid $10,000. So of course I had $10,000. I could find the $10,000. So should I pay? I mean, would you pay?
Go on, show of hands. What do you do? Yeah.
So it's okay. I can call tomorrow to the community of the refugees in Sudan in Israel, and I can find someone to right now that can share with us that his family is now captured, and in a few weeks they're going to be slaughtered. I can find that quite easily, actually. Because how can you deal with that? I mean, there is death on a daily basis. People are kidnapped on a daily basis. I cannot confront with all the suffering of Palestine at the same time, for example. So I think once you realize that, the more you live that, the more you see small stories, and it becomes just small stories, and you feel you're obligated. But the more you're into it, you're flooded by that, and then you have to accept it in some sort of way, and actually it helps you because you put all this energy into the film, because then the film can be a way to change. You feel the importance of it, because I can spend $20,000 tomorrow, and the week after is going to be another situation, and then what? You know? So, but I can understand. I mean, I couldn't, and they were executed. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It happens daily.
So, guys, film 5 Broken Cameras. Can we see a clip from that, please? This is, you can see this tomorrow at 12:45 in the Library Theatre, and as with the rest, of course, in the Videotheque as well.
Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you.
الجيش بيدخل ويتعمق أكثر وأكثر داخل البلد، يحاول يمنع الناس من أنها تروح على المظاهرات.
So that's 12:45 tomorrow in the Library Theatre.
Actually, I wanted to show them a few seconds after, but I can tell them also, because I think they were more controversial than this scene, which is very interesting for the discussion, but it's less controversial, I think.
So what's...
There's a teaser. You have to go and see it.
But I think, yeah, what happens after, in the scene after, that he takes Jibril, his son, Imad, the cameraman, takes Jibril, his son, to the demonstration so he can see what's happening. And I think it's just the beginning here, because you see him in the rooftop, so he's still more protected. But then after, he really takes him to the demonstration. And I think in a lot of Q&As, we got a lot of responses to that moment, because people, they feel that that Imad and the Palestinians are taking the kids to the demonstration as a choice, and they're risking their lives, and they don't like to hear it. They don't like to watch it. They feel that the kids are being brought into this zone, and I really insisted for that to be in the film. And it was a big discussion. I knew it's going to be controversial, and I actually asked of Imad to film this kind of scenes, because he didn't film this kind of scenes normally. So it created, for me, I had no doubts that it has to be in the film. Also, we see in these scenes, one of the first scenes in the film, that you see the kids throwing the stones, which also is a big issue, especially in Israel. In most of the film in Palestine, coming from an activist kind of point of view, you try to hide this, and we try to put it up front. We see the kids throwing stones, and actually in one point you almost identify with them. You want to throw stones with them. I think some of the people, they feel it. I'm not sure everyone. And but I thought, what I thought is I try to understand why people are, why the kids are such an important part of this movement in Palestine, and I thought it's an important issue that everybody else tries to avoid. And for me, that was one of the focuses of the film, was about childhood. I had a lot of conversation about childhood with many people in Palestine, and the way they experienced their childhood, and there's of course the constant debate whether the kids are educated to be violent, and I found out that for them it's a way to expose the kids to the tough reality, isn't a strategy, because if you for instance, I know one man in the village who tried to protect his kids, not taking him for a demonstration, not to expose to him anything that's happening. And at one point, I saw this footage, it's not in the film, soldiers entering to his house because he has a good house spotted on the main street of the road of Bilin. So they come up in the house and they traumatize the kids with their guns. They're hitting the father, climbing over the roof. And you see these kids are really fragile. They're not prepared to do anything. They're just not tough enough for Palestine. And they're traumatized, and they're just not, you cannot avoid this situation, so you have to prepare yourself for this situation. So actually what Imad is doing when he takes Jibril to his demonstration is preparing him, see this violence, have your anger, confront with it, take a risk, because it's going to come to you one way or another. But it's better for me to be there with you, to guide you through it. Because if I'm not going to be there, this kid is going to go to the street and he's going to throw stones with the others. So you have to take calculated risk when you live in Palestine, and so that was the decision why we used this footage at the end.
Just hang on, wait for the mic to get to you.
Sorry. Intervening could also be using the film and touring with the film and creating the discussion around the issue. I don't know how you in Israel or the other filmmakers
I tell you what,
do that.
Can I suggest you go to the film tomorrow and do this in the Q&A afterwards? Is there a Q&A after tomorrow's?
There's going to be Q&A in the afternoon.
So let's bring this up in the Q&A afterwards. The reason I say that is because we're running out of time, and I just want to show Rachel's clip from Speed Sisters. Do you want to just tell us quickly about it, Rachel?
Well, yeah, kind of interesting because it's not as dramatic, because it's not in, a situation where we're watching a demonstration, but it's kind of like the film is about a group of mostly young women who are from very different backgrounds, who've come together to race cars. And it's kind of like a resistance for them, and they have different feelings about the politics of the situation, where they live, and they're very different people. This is Mara, who's 19. For her, it's really about, it's part of her coming of age, and this is just a little clip of the resistance that they come up against.
عملناش شيء غلط يعني مش عم نعمل شيء غلط
تعالي فهمي الصورة
لا ما بنيجي
طب اعطيني الهوية
اعطيه الهوية
رايد معي هذا
ما يصورش ليش لك ما يصورش بس الفيلم شغال راح ينطبل شو بدك فيها هوية
عشان تراجعينا
لا ايوه
بقول لك البنت مش راح تنزل مش رايحين ننزل مش رايحين ننزل احنا ما عملنا شيء غلط يعني
ايش بده هو هلا؟
بدي الهوية
انا بعطيك لا تعطيهاش هويتك ليش؟ لا فيش ياخذ هويتك تعطيهاش هويتك مش عاملين شيء غلط هاي الساحة عندهم ماخذين اذن منهم
عم احكي مع ابوك تلفون بنهي كل شيء
ليش ابوي انا بقدرش انهي كل شيء يعني صغيرة انا
So, you know, her family are really, she's got this great dad, and he's such a brilliant, you know, I think these women all bring something quite interesting because they're quite counterintuitive for me. And they're, you know, it's a way in to show stories about particular Arab women who have kind of one foot in the West and one foot in, you know, the Palestinian world, and they have different views about covering, they have different views about their faith, and they've all got their emotional journey. So it's very much a character-driven, racing is kind of the hook, and it is part of their resistance and what's, for them, what allows them to feel free. Because if in a way, the car is something, you know, it's mobility. In a place where they're completely constrained, they can drive fast and get it out of their system. So it's just a great way into, we're going to understand the place. The walls are there, you know, the restrictions are there, but it's just a different way into showing the you know, what it's like to live there, and especially for women. But Mara ended up, they did get arrested and they got taken to the police station, and Amber, with her camera, was there all the way. And again, it's another dilemma. Amber ended up phoning a mate to get them out, you know, because they'd been there long enough, and, you know, it was all so Amber did make that call, and they did get out. But, you know, it's just, that's what their life's like. And she definitely got that footage. She got the footage of, why are we being arrested for driving in a parking lot when we've got permission? I mean, it wouldn't occur to me to get, you know, where I live, we wouldn't get arrested for that, you know. So it's letting the audience into that reality, but at the same time, not letting them sit in jail for 3 days while they, you know. So I think Amber made the right call, but again, it's another dilemma. So, and it's a shame she's not here, but maybe she will be next year, so she can tell you herself.
So that's Speechless is still in production.
Oh yeah, we've gone a long way with the money from WorldView. We've really we're forging ahead, but we're kind of at the end of development now. But the racing season finishes, it's all the way through from March till the end of November this year. We're following the racing season, but also very much their personal narratives. And then we go into the edit, and hopefully it'll be ready by next summer.
Just in time for Sheffield
Absolutely.
Documentary Festival.
You never know.
And with that excellent plug for WorldView that you just threw nicely over there, I just want to remind you, if you have a look at the WorldView website, it'll be all refreshed and renewed in about 10 days' time. And obviously, it's a good place to go to try and get money. So do go to the WorldView website. Thank you very much to our esteemed panel. Give them a round of applause. And just remember, you've still got time to see 5 Broken Cameras and Reluctant Revolutionary on tomorrow, and in the videotheque. Thank you.